Woods once again with the advantage. Oh, God!
My God, new levels of hardcore here.
I was born October 31st, 1988 at Sheffield, Alabama, Helen Keller Hospital. Birth given name is actually Brandon Dwayne Woods. I was, pretty much brought into this world having a little bit of nothing. I was a single child to a single mother. My dad had actually left my mother right as he found out she was pregnant. So I was fairly brought up by only my mother and my grandmother. And, things were tough, of course, growing up. Didn't really have a whole lot of income. My mother and the rest of my family had actually moved to Alabama from Chicago, Illinois in 1978. And so whenever they moved to Alabama, my mother dropped out of school. She went straight to work. So growing up, didn't really have a whole lot of income. My mother, she done everything she could to hold a job. My mom, she would work all day long at a grocery store, convenience store, whatever she needed, and then turn around and go waitress at a bar all night long. Then wake up later that day and turn around and go to a local Waffle House or, breakfast dine-in and waitress there on her off days. Didn't really have anything I actually wanted, but my mother always made sure I had everything I needed. And that was basically my childhood. It just really put a strain on me. So growing up, I always knew that no matter what, somehow, some way, I was going to prove to be more than just that. I was going to find a way to provide better for myself and for my kids when the day came. Basically, my life was always riddled with injuries, pains from the very start. One of my earliest childhood memories, I was actually 5 years old. It was on my birthday. I had gotten a brand new bicycle for my birthday. It was the greatest thing ever because I never had nothing growing up. All my friends had bicycles, I never did. So of course I was ecstatic. And towards the end of my birthday, my mother and her boyfriend at the time was loading the bicycle into the trunk of the car. I had reached in to grab the bicycle because I was throwing a fit. I thought they were taking it away. They weren't really paying attention, and my left hand got closed and latched shut in the trunk of a car. Bittersweet day to me, one of the greatest days. Getting something I'd never had turned into an entire evening and night in an emergency room. First injuries, they stand to last forever. Got to use my hand now, but at 5 years old, it was pretty well gone. But pain-wise, that's only the beginning. My life was turned around forever by the age of 7. Like I said, I was brought up by my mother and my grandmother because my father had left my mom right as he found out she was pregnant, and he had actually went back to his ex-wife, who he had had a previous son with, my brother, who's actually 5 years older than me. So once I was born and everything was kind of set in place, my father felt obligated at the time to try to spend some time with me. It wasn't all the time, but he would do his best to come see me, to which I thought that was, good at the time. But like I said, at 7 years old, that completely came to a halt. I was spending the weekend with my dad and having a good time. Everything was going good. I'd always looked up to my brother, so of course I wanted to be just like him. He was a natural athlete, played football, baseball, was big into cars. Everyone liked him. He was really enjoyable, great guy. And so of course I wanted to be like him. So that night, me and my brother had been playing video games in his room and everything else. And I wanted to, just throw a pallet in his room, and we just kind of watched a movie and went to bed. And in the middle of the night, my stepmother came in the bedroom and found my brother sexually assaulting me. It's actually really hard for me to talk about, and it was only within the last year or so that I was actually able to confront a lot of what happened to me. And but it put a huge dent into my relationship with my father and that side of the family, and of course my brother. Right afterwards, I don't know if it was due to what happened or what, I pretty much shut down. I didn't know how to speak on it. I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't even know who to talk to. I was terrified to tell my mother. My stepmom, she came in, like I said, and she confronted my brother, and she tried to speak to me, and I just didn't know what to do. And as far as I'm aware, nothing was ever really said. They just kind of brushed it off, as well as pretty much brushed me off. I went from seeing my dad occasionally every other weekend, maybe once a month, to I didn't see my dad again until I was 14 years old. They took my mother to court trying to take custody of me. The only thing I could find reason was they was thinking if they had custody of me, they could keep me from ever saying anything that would have gotten my brother in trouble. But so many people out there nowadays that they're scared to speak on something like this that's happened to them, and one way or another it affects their life. It's affected me, and it's caused everything from personal struggles, anxieties, deep depression, to relationship issues where I don't have any trust in anybody. I struggle with trusting anyone around my kids right now. I don't care who they are. When you're 7 years old and the person you looked up to most at the time, your own flesh and blood, your brother, does something like that to you, it changes your life. But even at a young age, dealing with all that, of course, like I said, I shut myself down, and I went from a kid that was so playful and out and about, loved to be outside, hanging out with my friends, to I didn't want to leave the house. And so that put a lot of strain on my mother, because she didn't know what was wrong with me, and I didn't know how to speak on it. But as I've always done, I had to find some way to break free of the thought and find something else to sink my mind into. And about a year later is when I decided I wanted to start playing sports. I started playing baseball at first. Baseball to me, it was a decent little beginning sport, but it didn't really heighten my appetite for energy or concentration. I couldn't even step up to bat at a game without just feeling everyone was watching me, and I could be one of the best players on the team at practice, but whenever I got in front of everybody, I shut down. A lot going back towards all the instance that the case that happened to me barely a year ago. Being in front of all those people, knowing they were watching me, I didn't know what to do, and I would just shut down. So I played baseball for a little bit, and like I said, I was good at practice and all, but on the field during a game, it wasn't there. So I searched for a new outcome, and that's when I found football. I never really watched a lot of football growing up, but I loved it wasn't really the aesthetics of the sport. To me, it was the contact of the sport. I saw my cousins playing, and I wanted to play myself. The energy drawn off the field, it drew me in. So at 9 years old, I started playing football. Football, to me, that was the best outcome as far as disregarding what was going on in the back of my mind at all times. Because, whenever I got out on the field, I wasn't so much worried about everyone watching me. I was more worried about protecting myself. I had a way that, I could put all of my anger and aggression into something, and I could hurt somebody just as bad as they could hurt me. And that, I wasn't going to let anyone hurt me. And so I became, someone that they couldn't stand to be standing across from on the field. I went to practice. I nearly got kicked off the team my first year 3 different times because of injuring our own players during practice. And so it was decent. It really got my mind away from everything that was going on in my life, and it changed me, and I fell in love with it. So I played football for many years, and eventually led into another injury that actually costed me a good bit. But going on, it was always a struggle. It didn't matter. As soon as I stepped off the field playing football, as soon as I got home, everything in the back of my mind that happened, it was there, and I stayed depressed. So I was constantly pushing myself. Like I said, I got where whenever I got home from practice or anything like that, I locked myself in my room, and that's where I lived whenever I was at home. My grades and everything in school, they didn't really slip because I put all my focus into my grades. I always had good grades in school all the way. I actually graduated high school with a 3.7 GPA and an advanced diploma. It wasn't long after that I'd started to think that tragedy was, that was going to be one of the worst things that ever happened to me. And then at age 14, it all struck again. At 14, the only person I really had in my life, my mother, was taken from me with cancer. They found a spot of cancer the size of the end of a ballpoint pen on her lung in July. After my aunt, her younger sister, had just found out she had a brain tumor, and they had already pronounced her terminal. Put a lot of stress on my mother, and she started having pains, and I begged her, and she eventually went to the hospital. Her and my uncle, her oldest brother, decided they was going to take a trip to Texas to see one of the specialists. And whenever they got there, the spot that was the end of a ballpoint pen had already grown to larger than a softball. So in 2002, it was one thing after another. My aunt had found out she had this cancer, and after putting such a strain on my mom, she found out she had cancer, and it was real heartbreaking on our whole family. And my aunt passed away in August, and then my mother turned around just 4 months after she found out she had cancer. She passed away November 27th, 2002. I was the only person that I really had growing up that I knew I could fully trust. And, I never even spoke to her. She never even knew about what happened to me whenever I was 7. I was too scared to tell her. And so the fact that I had her there, though, really comforted me. And after I lost her, it just basically made me just fall apart. And that's when I made the choice, dealing with all the depression and everything I had, that I was going to attempt to take my own life. I had woke up in the middle of the night after a nightmare, dealing with what happened and losing my mother and everything, and I was so upset that I grabbed a knife I had in my drawer and I slit my arm from wrist to elbow. And it was just a moment of just complete disregard. I didn't know what to do, but I knew if I took my own life at that time that I wouldn't have to feel that pain anymore. However, if I'd have succeeded, I wouldn't be here to tell this story now. And so my grandmother, actually hearing the commotion and hearing me fall on the floor, came rushing in to check on me, and that's when she found me, and I was rushed to the local emergency room. And they had actually said that if she hadn't have found me when she did, if it had been 30 seconds later that I got to the hospital, they probably wouldn't have been able to save me. I'd already bled out so much. So it really affected me all the way. I mean, and like I said, my grandmother's who found me, and you know, that's who I lived with after my mother passed away. And you know, my father, not seeing him really since I was 7 years old, thought that he was going to come back into the picture whenever I was 14 after losing my mother. He tried to take custody of me yet again, and I refused. You know, I told the courts my grandmother's who I preferred to live with, and even at that point, I still couldn't even face my dad. I wouldn't even go into the courtroom with my dad, because knowing what had happened to me, you know, what I never understood is how can a father turn his son away after his eldest son done that to him? You know, my father knew what happened. He never tried to comfort me. He never tried to be there for me. I mean, here I sit, 28 years old. I've seen my dad one time in the last 12 years. I mean, and he didn't even know who I was. I bumped into him at a gas station and he had no clue who I was. But, I mean, life goes on, and you know, so I recovered from an attempted suicide, thinking that, you know, things again could not get any worse. And then just after that, the spring or winter of 2003, right after my mother passed away, I decided I was going to play football that season. Or not football, I decided I was going to play basketball that season, because the previous season of football, before my mother passed away, I had actually taken upon another injury where a player had fell on me and shattered my wrist. So I lost out on that season, so I decided I was going to go play basketball. And the whole idea was I needed something to consume my mind, to something to stay focused on, to keep me pushing forward. And little did I know that it was actually going to be the end of what I thought was my entire athletic career. I was playing a game against one of the number one teams that season, and me and one of the other larger guys tied up over a ball, and I took a hard fall to my right knee. Days after I kept having an intense pain in my knee that was just eating me alive. I couldn't stand it. I went to the hospital. They actually said I had a blood clot in my knee that most athletes carry. And it tends to break down and go away. It's nothing that is, uncommon of athletes. So they put me on crutches, said, just kind of take it easy for a week or so. But within a week or so, we need you to come off your crutches. And, they said, whether it hurts or not, you've got to get that knee moving to break that blood clot up. Because it was not in the blood vessel itself, it was actually in the joint of my knee. So I came off my crutches and I was coming through the house and the phone rang. And like I said, I was still struggling to even walk. And the phone rang and I tried to rush to get to the phone, and instead of taking my time, I wasn't paying attention, and I tripped, and whenever I fell back to my right knee again. I heard a loud pop, and I fell over to the floor, and I could feel an immense pain that radiated from my rib cage all the way down to my toes, and I couldn't move. It was, I couldn't even lean up to look to see what was going on. But in my mind, I thought I just broke my knee. I yelled. My grandmother, she called for an ambulance. Whenever they got there, they was able to see what had happened. What had happened when I was playing basketball was I didn't injure my knee. In fact, I had fractured my right hip. But the doctors didn't know it because the pain was radiating out of my hip, or out of my knee. They never thought to look at my hip. And so when I fell, it completely snapped my hip in half and shoved the top of my right femur all the way up into my rib cage. So that's why I was not able to sit up. However, I can't say I was strong enough. I never shed a tear. Never cried, I was in pain, but in my mind, pain was the least of my worries at this point. We get to the hospital, they do surgery, they needed 6 doctors working on me at the same time. They went in and they put a pin in my right hip, while nurses and doctors was pulling my right leg all the way down into place, trying to make sure that they didn't snag any of my intestines when they were pulling it back down. And so I had the surgery, thought everything was fine. It was just another day for me, dealing with something a little bit more intense. And the doctor told me, I would recover, wasn't that big of a deal. They were actually more worried about internal bleeding than they was me recovering with my hip. However, did I know the doctor was a fucking moron. The doctor, while in surgery, put a pin in my hip, but he didn't put a plate to hold it. So when he put the pin in, he put it too far. Then he tried to back it out and just leave it alone. Well, as I was healing, every time I moved my leg, the bone that was broke was actually still moving at a time, and it was causing that pin to screw deeper into that bone. And it found a air pocket in my bone and started tearing away at the ball socket of my hip. So barely a year after I had the pin put in, they had to remove the pin. And that's when half my ball joint to my hip completely fell out with it, completely rendering any options of athletics completely gone. I came out of surgery and, I already knew I was kind of on the sidelines from the initial break. And then I asked the doctor, I said, okay, so, you gave me 6 to 8 months to fully recover from the first surgery. How much longer do I got to wait now before I can return from this? That's when he broke the entire surgery down to me, and he informed me that I would probably never be able to play sports again. And that was the first time I shed a tear. My life at that point had already been riddled with just emotional and physical pain back and forth, to the point where I'd already tried to take my life, and now the only sport that I played, that I had the most love for, football, was taken from me. At the same time, not only was that taken from me, but my future career was taken from me, because I had already been scouted by multiple different colleges, including Alabama. And so I lost everything. And, so I didn't have many options. So I spoke with the doctor again a couple months later, and I decided that one way or another I was going to beat this. I'd seen people recover from worse, so I was going to find a way. And of course, the doctor here, he wouldn't even touch me again. So I went to Birmingham, and I was actually referred to the Children's Hospital, where Dr. Sean Gilbert took a look at my hip, and he told me that I had two options. And that was, at the age of 17, I could have my hip fully replaced or fused. 17 years old, the hip replacement, to me, couldn't do it. Hip replacements don't last, and I'm not gonna go through this surgery every couple of years just to try to maintain my body. So we searched out the options, and I had my hip fused, where they ended up putting a steel plate running from the very top of my hip halfway down my leg, and 13 screws, fusing my hip completely to my pelvis at a 45-degree angle. It helped. However, I was limited. I only had, like I said, 45 degrees of movement, but I was able to walk. I could get up to a decent, jog or run. But what sucked is, because of how the surgery went, it caused my pelvis to actually tilt on an axis, putting a lot of strain into my back, pinched sciatic nerves. And so, every day, every step I took, I was just eaten alive with pains. And, but regardless, it didn't matter. My mother brought me up. Like I said, she didn't have a whole lot growing up either, but my mother always found a way to get things done, and she was my biggest inspiration, and I wasn't going to do any different. So yet again, I forced myself to do what was needed to get by. And, so I started college and everything else, and a friend of mine who was actually, I went to school with when we were younger, we run back into one another, and he had been wrestling for a local organization. And he kept bugging me, hey, you need to come check it out, just come watch the show, everything else. And finally I decided I was going to go check it out. So I go watch the show. I'd loved wrestling growing up. I watched it all the time. The whole Attitude Era, the NWO, WWF Wars. I watched it all. ECW. I'd even watched a lot of things online from, Mexico and Japan and everywhere else. Video games, everything. So, I figured, why not? I can go check out a little local show. I didn't give it, much thought, thinking it wasn't going to be much of anything, but figured, what the hell. So I go, and I came to the realization, I don't care what anybody says. I'll be a fan to the day I die. But there's going to be good and bad no matter what show you go to, whether it's WWE or an independent show. But seeing wrestling live, the energy that's fed off a crowd right there around you, it's overwhelming. And after the show, my buddy just kept telling me, dude, injury or not, dude, he was like, you're a big guy. You could still do a lot if you wanted to take part. I figured he was just full of shit, but I told him, I said, all right, screw it. I said, I'll come to one tryout, one training session, see what happens. So I go and, first session I get done, and the guy that was training that day actually looked directly at me. He said, you're never gonna do shit. He said, your hip's messed up, your back's messed up. He's like, you're only 18 years old. You're never gonna do nothing. He's like, there's no point. He said, don't come back. That pissed me off. So I decided that fuck him, I was gonna be back. So I showed up the very next week, and I sat right there by the ring and I watched everyone else train, and I refused to leave. The next week I did the same thing all over again. 3 weeks into it, the trainer quit showing up. He didn't want to deal with me no more. He just disappeared. Well, there were several of the other guys that was already wrestling for the show. They still showed up and they trained on their own. And so I still kept showing up, and I would just keep picking their brain over and over, Hey, just show me something. Let me see if I can really do it, because nothing's ever stopped me before. And after learning a few, more details to what it takes in the ring, and, how I figured that I can work around a lot of this. I can manage myself to the point where, no one will ever know about my hip if they don't already know. So that's what I did. I showed up week after week after week, and I just got in and I trained with whoever was there, whoever would let me train with them. And a new trainer shows up. It was actually a female trainer. Her name is Destiny. And she showed up, and she was kind of looking over as I was working with a couple of the guys, and she approached me and, asked me what was going on, how long I'd been training. And, I told her what happened. And she was just blown away by the fact that not only was I told I wasn't going to do shit, but I'd been showing up every week, still doing more and more, and was actually progressing further than a lot of the people that had promising. So they decided to let me train with them. I trained for a little over a year, and I started wrestling. My first match was when I was 19 years old. I was thrown under a mask, tossed to the wind. I was a clown. They called me the oddity. And of course that didn't last. Didn't go anywhere. And I was slowly starting to come up, and I'd done a few little matches here and there, and I started developing a bit of a characteristic, and so I eventually progressed out of the mask and into a more standard character, to which I carried along my look of playing football, because that was the sport that really drew me into athletics. And so things was progressing. I was finally starting to sink my mind and aspirations into something else, keeping my mind clear of everything else that happened to me in the past, and I wasn't struggling near as bad. It wasn't long after that, whenever I turned 20, like I said, I was in college, but I had to drop out because my girlfriend at the time got pregnant with my oldest daughter. My daughter was born. I named her after my mother. And, to me, that was more than enough inspiration. I dedicated myself right then. I said, there will never be anything else that's going to stop me from doing what I want to do. I want my kid to grow up seeing her father say, you know what, you've got all this thrown in front of you. You've taken on all these injuries, all this bad stuff that's happened in your life, and you're still going to do what you want to do. It's not going to stop you. You're not going to sit around and mope. You're not going to sit around and, ask for help. You're going to take what you want. And so I started working out a lot more because I wasn't really doing much, or wasn't able to do much with my hip and the condition it was. But I figured I needed to do something. And no sooner than my daughter was born, yet again, I can't escape tragedy. My grandmother passes away. 7 years after my mother passed away, I lose the only other person I had in my life that was there to help raise me. And turn around, and I could handle it a lot better at that age. Plus I had my daughter, but it weighed a lot on my mind. And at that point, that's when I realized I had nobody. So I had to do something. My father was nowhere to be seen. Just lost my grandmother. My mother had already passed away. And the sad part was, once my grandmother passed away, the last bit of family I had just kind of disappeared on me as well. My aunts, my uncles, cousins, anybody, never had nothing to do with me. I got married on my mother's birthday this year, March 31st. And not a single blood relative of mine showed up at my wedding. So that just goes to show, regardless, if I didn't make it, if I didn't do something with my life, I had nobody to fall back on. I had nobody that was going to be there to support me, nobody that was going to pick me up. I had to do whatever I needed. And then right after that, I guess out of everything bad, something good shows up. Right after that, my girlfriend at the time, my daughter's mother, found out she was pregnant yet again, this time with my son. And so I was ecstatic. I was going to have a son, and I had 2 kids I could put all of my focus into and guarantee, like I said, no matter what, I had to find some way to turn my life around and make more for them. But sadly, right after my son was born, me and their mother parted ways. We'd got to a point where we was arguing all the time, couldn't get along, and it was overwhelming. And I figured it best, and so we decided that we would just kind of go our separate ways. So after that, I put all the focus I had into wrestling, but at the same time, losing my grandmother and everything else, wrestling to me had already started, as much as it helped me, it started getting, it started kind of going numb to me. I'd barely even been wrestling for 2-3 years, and it was already it was calming down to the point where the energy at the shows was there, but I didn't have the focus to push myself. And that's when I met Spider Boudreaux. Now, Spider is a character all on his own. Spider Boudreaux was a guy that had built his name off being stabbed by a box cutter. It was actually at Carnage Cup 7. what kind of person would do that to themselves? But, you know, you don't really know who you're dealing with until you actually get inside the mind of that person. I never expected by any means to ever do hardcore wrestling, more or less deathmatch wrestling. You know, I was a fan of it. I had the video games, DVDs, you know, stuff like that, because I mean, you can't help but being a fan of watching someone do this kind of brutality. You know, it's like watching Spartans in Rome. I mean, anything, gladiators. I mean, it's entertaining. And me and Spider actually connected. We was both at the time trying to do a little more progressive into working out, trying to get in a little bit better shape. And you know, he was returning from a shoulder injury at the time, and I was trying to just change my life. And we connected and decided we was going to kind of hang out and work out together. Little did I know that that was going to start a lot more to my career than what I expected. Hanging out, you know, me and Spider became close friends. I mean, to the point where friends as close as brothers. And we started wrestling again, started traveling, doing some local shows, and through means of some guys that he had wrestled with before, we ended up at a show in South Alabama. And the booker for the show was actually a guy that Spider had came in with, or, you know, started wrestling around back whenever he was a little bit younger. And one thing led to another, and Sickness, our tag team, ended up being thrown into a street fight. Spider was very much adamant about creating all these different kinds of weapons and bringing all kinds of different things to this match, and I was terrified. You know, I'd never even, you know, I'd been hit with a chair, cookie sheet, things of that sort, but thumbtacks, you know, staple guns, skewers, light tubes, anything, no. And I go into the match literally about to have an anxiety panic attack about what was going to happen. I left the match a bloody mess, feeling more relief than I'd ever felt in my entire life. Everything that had happened to me, you know, since such a young age, just went out the window. And all the pain that I felt from the match wasn't there. It was gone. It was like it never happened. The pain to me has got to the point, after dealing with so much, so many broken bones, so much heartache, so much mental anguish, that most pain doesn't faze me. And the pain that does initially, you know, break me down, I mean, it's so horrid that, you know, I honestly don't think most average people could ever handle it. You know, and I go every day with these pains, and I don't even take a single pain pill. I take 2 Aleve every morning, that's it. But I know, regardless, as much as I hurt, that pain is what makes me who I am. And that was the beginning of my deathmatch career. One match led to 2 matches led to 4, and then I ended up being placed in the Carnage Cup. Carnage Cup 8 was my very first deathmatch tournament, and I actually had to wrestle my own tag partner, Spider Boudreaux, in the very first round in a spider net deathmatch, where at the end of the match I was actually brought off the top of a truck into a ring completely covered in barbed wire, leaving me in a tangled mess, beaten, broken, and bloody. And it just, I found my calling. You know, it was something that, you know, I could take all of my wrestling skill and add the brutality to it, and it was something that I could put my focus and mind into, and all the stress of the world would be lifted off my shoulder, and I was able to completely perform in these shows, knowing that whenever I left, I was able to leave an impact with the fans and on myself. And so I wrestled, you know, doing these tournaments, other shows, everything, you know, and it really helped until a girl I had started dating, we had been together for almost 2 years after me and my kid's mother had split up, and I assumed everything was going well, and she's basically just up and wanted to leave me for no reason whatsoever, and everyone kept telling me, you know, this and that was going on, but I was so focused with everything that was going on around me as far as wrestling and trying to provide for my kids that I wasn't noticing. And a day after she left, I had found out the real reason was she was dropping my kids off at daycare to cheat on me with a guy that she worked with. All this brought to term after she aborted my child. And I don't know what it is, but it just made me fall apart all over again. Knowing that, you know, I had to sacrifice a child, and not noticing that, you know, my kids now was hurt so bad and everything else because they loved this woman like their own mother. They loved her to death. And for her to sit there and do them like that, you know, again, that just showed I didn't have anybody I could trust. I didn't know what to do with myself. I went home, and I had a bottle of medications from a injury I had suffered about 6 months prior, where I broke my ankle, and I had broke 3 bones along my foot and ankle, and I was given a bunch of medications, but again, I never took them, so they just sat in my cabinet. I went home and opened a bottle of whiskey, and I drank about half that bottle, and I opened a bottle of pain pills, and I took about half that bottle, and I picked up a razor blade, and I decided I was going to take my life yet again. I am ashamed to say more than anything that right here, right now, I regret it more than anything, because if I'd have succeeded yet again, I wouldn't be here, and my kids would be without a father. But I mean, a lot of the trauma that happened to me at such a young age, I didn't know how severe things had got in my mind, and I wasn't even at a point where I could recognize what was going on with me. I'd still yet to confront what had happened to me. And so at the littlest moment, things would arise that was causing me all kinds of issues. A friend of mine heard about what happened, and she came by the house to check on me, and they pushed in my door and they found me on the bathroom floor. Again, I was rushed to the ER and everything else, and I was able to, you know, make it. But at that time, you know, the doctors refused to let me leave at this point until I sat down, you know, with some therapists and tried to get some things off my mind. And so I sat down, I finally broke down, And, a lot of people, they refuse to get help. It takes a lot, and I understand it'll put a strain on anybody. Trying to open yourself up to bring in all this pain just so you can let it out. And I finally spoke with them, but I still couldn't face the fact of what happened to me when I was younger. But I was able to get a lot off my chest. And they sent me to a local psychiatric hospital, and doing a lot of testing and everything else, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is basically a little bit of everything. And they said it stemmed from, so much that had happened to me and overwhelmed me. And basically, severe depression, anxiety, being bipolar. I was ADHD, and because of everything, I developed paranoid schizophrenia. So much to the point, like I said, I couldn't trust anybody. There were even times that, the slightest words that could be said to me from my best friend, Spider. He's like a brother to me still to this day. I mean, if he was ever cross with me about anything, I would immediately think, in the back of my mind, I was nothing. I didn't mean anything to him, and he wanted to physically hurt me, even though down deep I knew that wasn't true. It's just people that close, family, friends, if you're close with somebody, you're going to have disagreements. But it was the fact of everything that was going on. I just felt like somewhere, someone was always out to get me. So I dealt with that, and I moved on. They put me on medications, and it was able to stable my mind a lot more. And I was finally able to, after speaking with doctors several times a few years later, I was able to open up about what happened to me as a child, and it's really changed my life. I was able to express myself to several people that never understood what was going on. There was people I dated, that I cared for more than anything, but I always pushed them away because nobody knew what was really going on. And even though me and those people, things ended badly, me being able to open up to them, it really, and get it all off my chest to them, and as well as several others that I know I hurt in the long run because of it, it did relieve a lot of the stress and anxiety that I did carry. And it opened me up to hold better relationships. And then back, let's see, it was whenever I was 26. Let's see, was it 2017? It was 2015. After getting past everything, I decided, with my wrestling career slowly starting to take off more and more, I had done several tournaments to the point where I was starting to really develop a name as Bryant Woods. I became known as the Suicidal Beast because of the fact of, like I said, whenever I was in the ring, especially doing death matches, I would completely put my whole mind and body into what I was doing because the pain didn't bother me. It actually helped me. Everyone says I enjoy pain. I don't enjoy pain. Pain fucking hurts. But it's the fact of the matter is, pain does not affect me the way it does most people. I don't enjoy it. It's just whenever I feel pain physically, mental pain, and all the anxieties and stress and depressions and everything else that goes on inside my mind, it disappears. I would rather feel physical pain than I would mental pain. And so I end up putting more of my body into a match than probably most people would be ever willing to consider. Even though, I've seen guys do a whole lot worse than myself. But things have progressed. I 2015, I reached out to another doctor. I had reached out to Dr. Andrews in Birmingham. And Dr. Andrews, I had him take a look at my hip and tell me what he thought of the condition it was in. And he looked it over and he told me that as good as a doctor as he was scared to touch it. Dr. Andrews, the guy that had done surgeries on multiple superstars, athletes, guys like Triple H and Shawn Michaels and all these guys, he turned me away. However, he told me the reason why is because he's not too great with hips. He wanted to refer me to someone better. He was actually such a great doctor, he didn't even charge me for the visit. And not only did he not charge me, but he referred me to my current doctor, Dr. Siegel. That way I would not have to even pay the walk-in fee. He referred me to Dr. Siegel, who's actually the leading specialist in hip repairs in the United States. I went to him. He checked out my hip. He just kind of asked me, what I was looking to do. And I kind of explained it to him. And then he asked me what I had been doing, because he had seen throughout the x-rays, I had already had, out of the 13 screws that was in my leg, 4 of them were broken in half. And that blew his mind. He said, what have you been doing? And I told him I've been a professional independent wrestler for the last, 5-6 years. And he argued. He said, there's no way. He said, there's no way your hip in the condition it was, you was ever able to play sports. I literally had to bring him video footage. And he said, that in itself is a medical mystery. He said, there's no way. He said, after looking me over completely, I have no cartilage in either knee. My MCL in my right knee is completely ripped in half. I have tendonitis in my right ankle. And I've broke over 100 separate bones. I now have a completely separated AC joint in my left shoulder. And he still is completely blown away by the fact that I was able to do anything. But he said that he could fix my hip. So at 26 years old, 9 years after having my hip fused, I'd already been wrestling. Like I said, started wrestling my first match when I was 19, so I've been wrestling for 7 years. I had a complete hip replacement. I come out of surgery, the nurse came up to me that day and said, they wanted to do therapy. And I told them, I said, it's not going to happen. And she argued with me, but, she eventually left. But the next day, regardless, they had to get me out of the bed. Well, the nurse comes in, she tries to move me, and I threw, that was the most intense pain I'd ever felt in my life. Muscles that had been in atrophy for the last 9 years were now able to move. They were sore, they were bruised. My body was literally beaten to its max at this point. And the nurse left the room to go get assistance to help get me out of bed. But I knew that I can force myself to do more than anyone else can. Less than 2 minutes, the nurse walks back into the room and I'm standing at bedside. No assistance. I refused all assistance due to the fact, they don't know what my limits are. I do. And one way or another, I'm going to show that I can do this with nobody else's help but my own. So, I knew that regardless, I could push myself further than anyone else. But at the same time, Dr. Siegel told me, he don't recommend that I go back to wrestling. He don't recommend, half the things I do, but that's all I have. I have my kids, and I have my wife now, and wrestling. That's it. That's where all my love and all my focus goes. So, I can't turn around and go back trying to play football. Lost out on scholarships and everything else. It's not like I can turn around and go for tryouts, and I'm 28 years old. So I said, screw it. I'm going to show him something different. I did therapy for 6 weeks. 3 weeks into therapy, they told, I was having to take sponge baths. They didn't want me getting in and out of the shower. Home health was coming to my house trying to make sure and help me take care of myself because, like I said, nobody was there. I had one person there to help me out, a guy that, again, I thought was my friend. Spider, he's busy with his own life. He had recently been married, and he had his own family, so he wasn't able to be there to help take care of me. So I had another friend of mine come help me. This guy stole away with over half my pain pills. And he's a guy that, has wrestled for WWE, that I considered one of my friends. Stole half my pain pills. And so I said, screw it. I'm not going to ask anybody to come to my house and help take care of me. I was just going to, I'm already paying the money for it. I'm just going to make them do it. So they would come to my house and, they would get everything set up, and I would give myself a sponge bath and everything else and try to help. And finally one day, the nurse called me. There was going to be, she was going to be late. I was tired of waiting. I hadn't been able to bathe in like 2 days. No. I go in the bathroom, propped a crutch next to the shower. I lifted myself into the shower. Gave myself my own actual shower, able to wash my hair and do everything. I got out. Nurse shows up, walks in the house. My hair's still wet. She asks me what happened. She flips out. You're not supposed to be doing that. You're not supposed to be, fuck you. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I've been through more pain than most people could ever imagine, that most people could never handle. And yet you want to tell me I can't take a shower? Because the doctor says I don't need to yet? No. So 6 weeks after therapy, I refused to see him again. I was able to, 6 weeks, I was already walking on a cane after a total hip replacement. Told him I didn't need to see him no more. I was able to drive my vehicle. My place that had become a home away from home was the gym, and that's where I was headed. So at 6 weeks, I started going back to the gym, and I started applying weight, working on my leg, exercises that I had not been able to do in 12 years. I was gonna do. And at 6 months, I had to take yet again video footage to Dr. Siegel, blowing his mind that at 6 months I was leg pressing 800 pounds. And I was doing squats with 350. Again, he claims it's not possible. There's no way, until he's seen the footage. He said, his exact words is, I don't know what you're made out of. I don't know if it's just nerves or inspiration. He said, but you're doing something that most would never even attempt. So pretty much that's when I decided, you may not think I can wrestle, just like all the other doctors that said I wouldn't ever be able to play any sport or do any athletics again. I'm going to prove you wrong yet again. So at 8 months, not even a year, 8 months after a total hip replacement, I stepped back in the ring. I returned to do a tag team deathmatch tournament. Me and Spider met up yet once again. First time we'd been a tag team in 2.5, 3 years. And towards the end of the match, I knew without a shadow of doubt, if I'm ever going to get myself over the nerve, knowing what had happened with my leg and everything else, I needed to push myself that much further. So towards the end of the match, I climbed up on the top rope as I had done prior to surgery, but this time I moonsaulted all the way to the ground. Being caught by 3 other competitors, the other tag team and Spider included. And I got up, pain was gone. I knew that I was going to be better than ever. Right then is when I decided, no matter what, I was going to do what no one else thought of me, and I was going to prove everyone wrong. So I left from there. I was actually, wasn't long after that, I was invited to go do a show I'd actually been looking forward to for many years. And I got to go wrestle for The Gathering, JCW. I did Stranglemania. And apparently returning from hip surgery, as soon as I did, even though I knew that I could be better than I ever was, it proved me that I probably should have waited at least another couple of months. Because right after that, I go into this show. I took a hard finish and ended up with 2 broken ribs and 3 that were dislocated. And I had to wrestle King of the Deathmatch 2 weeks later. Like I said, pain, it fades. To me, it basically just, it blocks out all the mental pain that goes on in my life. And so I go into King. Right off the bat, towards the beginning of the show, yet again, I climb up to the top. I do the moonsault all the way to the concrete. Being that it is a deathmatch tournament, there's broken glass everywhere. And a severed tube goes through the bottom of my hand, completely lacerating my tendons, rendering all use of my thumb and my index finger pretty much gone. Having to go right back into surgery. 10 months after, having messed up my hip. I mean, having my hip surgery, it was ridiculous. Everything had been going so well for me. I come back from surgery sooner than what I expected, and I turn around and, I immediately break the ice doing what I love to do and lay my body on the line. I got invited to do Zandig's Tournament of Survival, right off the bat. I was one of his first names that, he wanted at his show, getting to do JCW. And it was just one thing after another. Everything was starting to fall in place, and then now I've done messed up my hand. The doctor told me if my hand recovered fully, I would probably only gain about 75% of use of my finger and thumb. But as you can see, I proved him wrong yet again. I actually ruptured the tendon a week after I had the surgery. I had to go back into surgery. So I had to have the exact same surgery a week and a half apart. So yet again, I'm on the return. My life has been just, without a doubt, to me, it doesn't seem like a whole lot that, so many other people have faced, but to me, the way that everyone's affected different by everything that's happened, and the things that has happened to me, it crushed me. And so forcing myself to keep getting up and keep returning, that's what makes me the beast. Suicidal, the suicide thoughts in my head, they're long since gone. I don't want to kill myself anymore. But the fact is, I'm willing to lay my body on the line for what I love. And I'm willing to show everybody that no matter how bad the pain is, I can keep getting up. And I've developed myself as to being that person. You know, I'm a guy that went from having nothing to, I was married just 2 weeks ago to a beautiful wife. Someone that understands everything that's happened to me in my life. You know, everything from my past to where I am now, one thing after another, I get booked to do a show, and she doesn't say, no, I don't want you doing this, and then I don't want you doing that. Her exact words are, do I need to take off work so I can be there to take care of you? She's an amazing woman. And I'm able to provide for my family. I've been able to do everything that everyone said that I would not be able to fully do. And I'll stand testament till the end of time. No matter what happens to anyone in their life, they can get up, they can put their foot down, and they can do what they want. Nothing will ever stop me. And I guarantee you nothing will ever stop my children. They're going to grow up watching their father do everything he loves, knowing everything that has happened to him in his life. And they'll know that no matter what happens to them, they'll have that inspiration to say, nothing ever stopped my father, nothing's ever going to stop me. To me, that means everything. Yet again, like I said, I'm on the return. I've got Carnage Cup 2 weeks away. Do you think I'm ever going to stop? Probably not. But what I am going to do is I'm going to show everyone out there that I can be better than I was before, and I will always improve. Just be me. Because I am the suicidal beast. I am Bryant Woods. But behind that monster in the ring, I'm still Brandon. I'm still a father. I'm still a husband. I've got to provide for my family, and I'm going to do what I love. And hopefully that'll inspire someone else to do the same.
And look at this, Woods once again with the advantage. Oh, God!
My God, new levels of hardcore here. Today, did you?
Spider driver, perhaps?
Oh! Woods' face about a fourth of his face, and including his left eye, it was like.
I have no idea what's coming.